Dean, popular with day trippers, now had celebrity status. A boon for Volk and his electric railway. And now, exposed by the tide, is what I've come to see. Ian Gledhill has written a history of Volk's eccentric railway.
Ian, this is completely mad!
It is unbelievable, isn't it, that there should be a railway along the beach like this? Track ran on these concrete blocks. This is one set of tracks, and there was another set a little further over.
Hang on. I can see its line running all the way along here.
4 rails. There were 2 rails on here and 2 rails over there, 18 feet between the two. I think the widest track gauge of any railway ever built.
It stretched for 3 miles towards Brighton. The track was underwater at high tide. So what sort of train could run on it?
This is a model made by Magnus Volk in 1893. The final one looked somewhat different from that, but that was his first idea of it.
Isn't that wonderful? It must have been an extraordinary sight.
Well, it was absolutely enormous. It stood on legs 24 feet high. The deck was 50 feet long. On the top there was a cabin that could carry sort of 30 passengers in comfort with stained glass windows, chandeliers.
I mean, can I just ask the simple question?
Yes.
It operated by electricity.
Yes.
It's going underwater. How did it work?
Well, it was an overhead wire mounted on posts alongside the track, and current came through the motor, and then the return was through the rails. So that meant at high tide it was through the sea itself. But there wasn't a health and safety executive in those days. I don't know what they'd have said about it if he proposed it now.
And this is the only footage of Volk's creation, the Daddy Longlegs, as it came to be known, at high tide. But the Daddy Longlegs was created as an extension to a railway Volk was already operating in Brighton. This is him, on the footplate, on its opening day. Over 125 years later, it's still running along the seafront of Brighton. I'm curious to know about Volk the man. His granddaughter, Jill Cross, remembers him from the 1920s.
He was a very inventive person. His house was the first one in Brighton to be lit with electricity. Also, he was an honorary radiographer at the Children's Hospital.
As a teenager, Jill used to visit her grandfather at his workshop, which is still being used by the railway today.
It's such a small door.
Well, he wasn't very big himself. About 80 years since I came here last.
What was this space used for?
They had the dynamos here to power the electric railway. Nearly there.
So, Jill, do you almost expect to see your grandfather
there? Sitting at his desk and keeping an eye on things out there, watching the trains go up and down. That's wonderful.
You can see why he chose this spot for his office.
Yes, see what's going on. That's good.
So Volk's original railway is still here. But what happened to his Daddy Longlegs?
There was the most appalling storm in 1896. Daddy Longlegs fell over and was totally destroyed. And it had only run for 6 days. You must imagine the frustration Magnus Volk must have felt. But he rebuilt it, and it ran for another 4 years after that.
Well, that must have cost investors a huge sum of money.
It was probably £500,000 in modern terms to rebuild it. And it never made money after that, which is one of the reasons why it didn't last.
In the end, Volk had to abandon the Daddy Longlegs because he couldn't afford to move the tracks to make way for new coastal defences. His electrifying attempt to conquer the waves, reclaimed by the sea.
There's been a steady flow of people with new ideas along this coast. Brighton, officially the city of Brighton and Hove, was in the 1820s the main terminal for ferry travel to France. Before the railways, it was the quickest route from London to Paris.